Even if we were to find a writing by Paul in a cave right now, it may be apostolic and it may be orthodox, but there's no way it could be universally shared in the early churches, not allowing it to become part of the New Testament canon. All right, so that's question 6. Question 7. Maybe the only reason anybody showed up tonight, other than to prayer, was to find out what is the best English Bible translation. All right? So I saved that one and I built the hype up so you guys wouldn't leave. All right, so a little bit more information. So this is like a history lesson. Think of it that way. If you love history, you're getting a lot. If you don't, I know you're still excited because you love God and you love the Word. So the Bible was originally written in 3 languages. Okay, 3 languages: Hebrew, Aramaic, and the New Testament is Greek. Okay, the grandfather language of English, which all of us speak here, is Old English. And he kind of goes down a little more depth on how it became Old English. It really just is kind of confusing. Had to do with certain people conquering certain people and Germanic guys taking over this. Basically, it's a bunch of languages melted together, and that's how we got English. I mean, that's the short story of it. Okay. So here we have English. Something I added when I looked up some information about the languages. There's roughly 172,000 words in the English language. Hebrew has roughly 33,000, and Greek has between 150 and 250,000 words. So when you think of that and you get perspective, you think all these words need to be combined, interpreted, and pushed into the English language. So you can see where the complications and issues come up through that. All right, so a little English Bible history. Starting in 1382, the famous reformer church leader John Wycliffe, you may have heard of the Wycliffe Bible, translated the entire Bible into the English of his day, which would have been Middle English or Old English. The translation was based on the Latin Vulgate, who was written by Jerome. However, the monarchy did not like it. Okay, typical, the government wasn't a fan of people being able to read the Bible on their own and not get it straight from the church, straight from the government. So he's distributing this Bible, and people are reading it, and they're saying, you know what, we think the monarchy needs to reform. They're not doing things right according to what the Word of God says. So what does the church, or what does the monarchy do in 1414? They outlaw reading the English Bible. They make it punishable by death. They call it a capital offense. In 1428, just 14 years later, this is how obsessed they were with outlawing it. They exhumed Wycliffe's body. He had already been dead for years. They exhumed his body, and they burned him symbolically at the stake, just to show people how serious they were about not reading the English. Fast forward about 100 years, 1526, you have William Tyndale. Now, Tyndale was able to use the printing press. He published the first printed English New Testament. It was translated from the Greek, and it was an original, and he published it. He started to distribute it throughout the continental Europe, and then slowly they started to smuggle it into England. England still has this rule. English isn't allowed. In 1535, the Coverdale Bible, which is named after Tyndale's assistant, is published. Now, this is the entire Bible, the first time the whole Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, all done on a printing press, is distributed throughout Europe and the areas and smuggled into England. Well, lo and behold, Henry VIII heard about it, figured out who was doing it, and guess what happened to Tyndale? He was strangled and burned at the stake. Persecution and martyrdom has been since the beginning of Christianity, all the way back to Stephen. Okay? So think about what these guys did to help get to the translation of the English Bible to what we have now. Now, there's a rumor that says Tyndale prayed for the king while he was dying, and he said, Lord, open the eyes of the King of England. And God answered that prayer. In 1536, within 1 year in 1537, the king authorized the distribution of the English Bible. And for the next 100 years, there was an outbreak of English Bible translations produced, all thanks to Wycliffe and Tyndale leading the way. Almost every translation that was produced within the next 100 years was because of Tyndale, and they used his original production on the printing press. Now, let's talk about approaches to translation. So we really want to answer the question, which translation is best, which one should I use? So there's 2 main approaches to translation. I call them the 2 Fs. And the first one is a functionally equivalent translation. So functionally equivalent or dynamic. One of the examples, the nuclear focused on not necessarily following word for word or preserving every grammar specific. It's more of a thought for thought translation. The other F is a formally equivalent translation. So now the formally equivalent translation is concerned with the opposite. It wants to preserve as much of the original as possible. Some examples are the New American Standard Bible, the English Standard Version, ESV. They are more of a word-for-word translation. Sometimes when you're translating, like we talked about the number of words from another